Without no further, oh, so with no further ado, that's okay, Jennifer. We'll go ahead and get started. So the first thing we would love to know, well, let's tell you what we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk a little bit about the caregiving landscape, call out to Jason for setting the table for us a little bit and talking about the statistics around workplace caregivers. We'll share a few of those with you here as well. We'll talk about why caregiving matters, challenges that working caregivers face, impacts on career health and well-being. And then what we are excited to share with you today is a new caregiver communication toolkit that's been developed by Disability IN. And Darren will be introducing you to Disability IN and that toolkit. So why does caregiving matter in the workplace? This was actually, these bullets were taken from the Idaho Caregiver Alliance website several years ago. We have known caregiving is an increasing challenge in the workplace and the impact on the working American. And caregiving is something almost all people will engage in at some point in their working lives. It touches individuals from every demographic, at every level of seniority in a business, and it ranges from childcare to elder care. And we know that it has an economic toll and an emotional toll on employees and employers that impact the workplace. And navigating that space together helps us do that more effectively. So if you could launch the first poll here for me, Jennifer, we'd love to know who is in the room with us today. So if you could select what the option that best describes your current status. Let's see, can you launch that poll for me? Does anybody see the poll? I don't see the poll. Jennifer, can you launch that poll?
We're having a quick technical issue. Will give me one moment. I apologize.
That's okay. We're looking for it. Is there a way I should try to do that? There. Till the poll. Let's see here. There's a way I can do that. And I don't see the poll here. Let's give it one more second. And if it doesn't work, we'll just have people put their status in chat. Why don't we go ahead and do that for this poll? If you would just type in chat what your status is, that will help us. Thank you, Tina. I don't see any other responses yet. There we go. Professionals, part-time, full-time employment. Great. Thank you. Pacific Source Health Plans. All right, we've got some employers, some caregivers, family caregivers who are working. Okay, very good. Tech Ed for older adults. Good morning, Tina. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and move along here. Certified family home, very good. I'm going to give it one more second and see if we have any other responses. Okay, a couple of certified family homes. You are working caregivers by definition. All right. So Jennifer, should we assume that the polling isn't going to work this morning? Do you know?
I am trying to problem solve it right now. For some reason, I'm not seeing them pull up, but if I will let you know if I get it fixed.
All right. Well, we're just going to assume it's not going to work and move on rather than have technical difficulties this morning. So one of the things we have here is just another view of those metrics. And the question is, what percentage of US adults care for someone with a medical condition or disability? And so this is not parenting, as Jason said this morning, but rather caregiving for someone with a medical condition or disability of any age. I'm going to leave you a moment. Okay, we got 30 plus in the chat. Let's see who else is willing to give me a guess in the chat there, what you think that number is. 20, 30, 30, 30, 30, 25. All right, let's see what we've got here. Put this down. It's actually 25%. So those of you who were in that 25 to 30% guess, about 63 million US adults provide care to adults or children with a medical condition or disability. And it's 25% of all US adults. It's a lot. You know, yes, it's the minority, but it's a large number of adults who are providing care to someone else. And what percentage of family caregivers are employed? If you were listening this morning to Jason, he gave us this statistic. I rounded it up, but anybody have a number out there they're willing to guess for me? Let's see over here. All right, Rich gets the prize. He's the first one there. The number is actually 70%. There's slightly different metrics depending on the study that you look at, but about 70% of working age caregivers, 18 to 64, are employed while they're also providing care. And this presents unique challenges. I often tell people caregivers are the busiest people I know. And as an employer and working in industry, I would hire a caregiver given their organizational skills, somebody who's been a caregiver. These are organized, committed people who work very hard to balance it all. And when you put all of those numbers together, what it means is about 1 in 5 employees are caregivers. So 1 in 4 adults, 1 in 5 employees. So when you're looking at a meeting room or in your workplace, you know, 1 of every 5 people is statistically a caregiver. So what does that mean? And with caregiving being so prevalent in the workplace, what are the impacts of caregiving on the working caregiver? And the first is absenteeism. And working caregivers do miss an average of 6.5 work days a year for their caregiving responsibilities. 24% of caregivers feel that caregiving has an impact on their work performance and hours. Yes, thank you, Cindy. Burnout. Feel free to put your comments in there. How do you think it impacts you as an employee or your employees if you're an employer? Caregivers are twice as likely to develop a chronic illness. We see this, and this comes largely from the fact that caregivers often put their own care behind the care of the person that they're caring for. And when balancing work and the responsibilities of caregiving, they are more likely to develop chronic illness themselves. Twice as likely to suffer from depression. This comes along with burnout, right? Burnout, anxiety, depression, and this obviously impacts, and lack of sleep impacts depression as well. So all of these things are very connected. And then financial security. We talked about that this morning, where you're earning less, you're spending more, and that results in 44% of caregivers experiencing financial strain. 25% of caregivers indicate that caregiving has impacted their retirement plans. And almost 40% of caregivers ultimately leave their job to have more time to care for a loved one. And given the demographics of caregivers, this is disproportionately impacting women who are already at a deficit, usually in planning for retirement. All right, so given that we haven't, I'm so glad you feel seen, Cindy. I see you. We are here, we are talking to you and making sure working caregivers have some tools to help them in navigating their space. So I do want to take a moment and ask those of you who are caregivers, does your employer know about your caregiving responsibilities? And I'm going to take a moment and watch for a few answers. I'd love to know, of those working caregivers that are working outside of a certified family home or something, but in industry, does your employer know you're caregiving? Some, that's pretty good. Some. All right, 1,000,000%. I love that. You have FMLA. Okay, very good. I'm going to see if there's anybody else who wants to answer. So, statistically and on average, only 49% of caregivers report that their supervisor is aware of their caregiving responsibilities. And the reasons for that lack of transparency are rooted in fear of losing their job, belief that their employer is not sympathetic to their situation. And this one I find really interesting, and I've seen it a lot in my own workplace. Caregiving isn't always a joyful topic. And when everybody comes in and people say, what'd you do this weekend? Or how's the baby? These are all wonderful things. You're sharing usually exciting things, joyful practices in your life. And to say, how's mom? And to have somebody say, well, we had a rough weekend. This was a tough time. And caregiving often is exhausting, and people don't know how to engage in their workplace in a meaningful way, given where they are and where they sit.
And Dara, can I add on to that last
Oh,
one?
please.
So I think, the fear, it's not always about losing a job, but it's fear of a lot of times disclosing or feeling uncomfortable. I think there's a lot of reasons that are subtle that we aren't quite open about it. There might be you might feel like if you do share your caregiving responsibilities that you might, and you're asking for things, you might feel like you're getting special treatment stigma. Um, there might be more scrutiny or performance if you disclose that you're a caregiver. And really, I think one of the things that we start to talk about is how do we move that needle up to having this more normalized as a conversation in caregiving. And I think talking about it is just one way to help with that. And it reduces fear of the perceived threat that might be out there with caregiving conversations or caregiving asks or supports in the workplace.
So, Darren, thanks for the additional comments. And it is my pleasure to introduce Darren to share some tools now for caregivers in the workplace to help with some of these challenges around disclosure, around communication, to hopefully help them be more effective in managing their caregiving responsibilities while working. So, Darren, why don't you introduce yourself and Disability IN?
Yeah, thank you. So I'm a caregiver to an adult daughter. She's has a rare genetic syndrome, and also working for HP as an engineer, working in Boise. The as part of as I'm involved with disability organization within HP. I'll talk about ERGs quite a bit. ERGs are employee resource groups. They're a group of employees that typically focus around um, uh, an area like disability or pride or multicultural, those kind of things. Um, so I've been chair of the HP's Global Disability BRG and also the Boise BRG. One of the things that we're connected with is Disability In. They're a nonprofit organization. They work with businesses across the world on disability inclusion efforts. They're typically partnered with large corporations. HP is part of that. Dara and I work for HP. I don't know if Dara, you mentioned that you work for HP,
I do.
but but one of the things that they do annually is to develop resources that are helpful for companies. And the this last year I was part of the group that worked together to develop a caregiving resource for ERGs or employees of companies um, that that is and I'll get into that and I'll share what that's about. Not necessarily pulling out what ERGs can do to support the company, but more with pulling out the individual um, activities that anyone can do with their employment or employers. Um, and let's see. Yeah. So let's move on to the next one. So what I'm gonna break out of this resource that was developed is around a lot of communication tools, how to talk to your manager, how to develop a flexible work plan, um, how to talk about this with sample conversation starters, um, and emails, and then how to think through a communication plan if you're asking for adjustments in your work environment based on caregiving. So how to talk to your manager. So I think this is probably the biggest um, thing that I would say take away from this is be proactive, initiate conversations early, especially if caregiving needs affect your workload, schedule, and availability. So you don't know, the worst thing you do is wait for an emergency or have an issue that you're blaming the caregiving process for. If you know you're in that caregiving process, have a communication. Start talking about it with your manager if you have schedule interruptions and such. Develop a plan around that. And really, the other important part of that is, and it's part of being a plan. A plan always beats a confession. So getting ahead of it, having a conversation about your commitment to your role and your plan to stay productive is really key as far as um, showing to your manager and your management and your company that you really care about your job and you're not just complaining and wanting things. So be clear and solution orientated. So describe your caregiving responsibilities and how they may impact your work. Be prepared to propose solutions. So think about ahead of time before you have conversations, what you're asking for, what solutions that you've thought that could happen. I'll talk more about that planning part in a little bit. Know your rights. Sometimes you might need to know your rights. Usually caregiving status isn't protected category, but others might be. Know what's out there in case you need it. So one of the things that you want to think about at top to end for um, if you're asking for flexible work arrangements, what things do you need to consider, even before you have a conversation or during the process, planning things out so that you're on top of the solution. What are you might want to talk about what are your caregiving responsibilities? What flexible work arrangements might be available or you might consider that would work best for you and your company? Communications, um, you might have to discuss what best ways to get a hold of me. What will I have to talk to as far as my coworkers and how they will who will I talk to? What kind of coverage plans do I need? If I can't do the work, if I'm interrupted, who will take my coverage and how you communicate that out? And then how do you still plan to meet your work goals if you have a request for a flexible work plan? How will I track my progress? Um, when do we need to check in to reassess my performance and flexible work schedule? And then what other things might you need based on your job that you need help or support from you or your team or others? Um, One of the great things about this resource is it gives some sample conversation starters. So starting that conversation might be one of the biggest inhibitors um, to talking about caregiving. Um, you maybe have tried to avoid talking about it, um, but how can you bridge that and open it up? This resource has some good ways to start that conversation. You may be aware that I have caregiving responsibilities. Can you direct me to benefits and policies that describe any support that may be available? So that's kind of conversation starter to asking for information that might be available. I'd like to talk about how I can continue to meet my goals while managing my caregiving responsibilities. That's another indication I am committed to my job. I want to succeed. Let's talk about how we can do that. I've drafted a plan to stay productive while handling my caregiving duties. So that's again um, another way to show commitment and planning ahead for many interruptions that you might have. My caregiving hours has changed, so you may have something that comes up, and you want to reassure. I'd like to adjust my start times and my end time slightly. I mapped out how to do that. I stay on top of my responsibilities. Again, planning ahead, solution driven, conversation starter, right? So you're not just complaining, and you're not just in panic mode and asking for the manager to solve it. I'm helping to care for my child or parent with medical needs. I like to explore hybrid schedule, and still while maintaining my productivity. I'm facing a temporary caregiving emergency. Can we discuss short-term adjustments to my work schedule workload? So those are all easy ways or helpful ways to start having a conversation and really thoughtful ways to reach that topic if you need to with your manager. Same with an email. So a written request, I think a written request is overlooked sometimes if you're just having a casual conversation with your management, because it doesn't get written down. And it's like, what helps is when you look back and you say, I thought you said that I was okay for me to take Tuesdays off or something. You don't have that in writing. To continue that process and over time through emails is really helpful when things start to change or they get confused of what we talked about in the past. So email templates are available in this resource. And then thinking about the communication plan as a process, or what elements are important when communicating. You want to think about, these are things you want to think about as you plan the communication with your manager. What to communicate. What do I need to be clear about? What do I want to disclose? What don't I want to disclose? Who will be communicating? So decide with your manager who's going to be communicating with your coworkers and under what conditions. So for instance, you may need support from your coworkers if you are have to leave unexpectedly or at certain times of the day. Who's going to cover that? When you have a conversation with your manager, who's going to communicate that to the coworkers that Joe is going to be taking Tuesday afternoons off, and we need to cover for that? So, is that the manager that talks to the coworkers? Is that you? What support is needed? So, what if I have an adjustment in my work schedule from caregiving? What does it impact if I'm gone? Who's going to take over that? What can I do to replace that effort or that time off? Those are things you want to think about as you develop a plan. And then, how long will this support last? Maybe it's years, maybe it's 6 months, maybe it's 2 weeks. All of that you'd want to break out and communicate those expectations. Now, from the manager side, they're not always seeing that great communication conversation starter. They're often seeing things that might hint towards you needing support in the caregiving space. So, for example, there's obviously the direct statements, which are nice, but for instance, you may be aware that I have caregiving responsibilities. Can you direct me to information? Or I'm looking after my grandparent full time and it's starting to affect my schedule. There's other signals or starter or employees may be asking that give signals that they really need some support. I'm facing a temporary caregiving emergency with my child. Can we discuss a short-term adjustment to my schedule or workload? Or I might have to leave early or log off unexpectedly because of things happening at home. You might get indications based on just the emotional or stress of an employee talking about other things. For instance, my spouse has a number of doctor's appointments coming up and it's stressing me out. I'm overwhelmed with some personal things going on right now. I'm worried about how to juggle some things at home, some things I have happening at home. And then indirect hints. For instance, I've been on the phone with insurance companies a lot lately. My mornings have been unpredictable because of things going on at home. So each of those are indicators that, how about we, from a manager's point of view, or maybe even from colleagues' point of view, how can we open up that conversation and talk about the needs, the support that the company or work environment can give to the employee. So how to support your caregiver in the workplace. So from an individual perspective, there's lots of different ways. We talked about employer resource groups, which are really focus groups on that topic. I think of it similar, for a smaller company, a caregiver support group can be just as effective in different ways. I think a support group is a little bit more personal about the stories. Employee resource group might be a little bit more looking for gaps in their company's policies or behaviors and working together to try to solve some of those. If you're in the know on caregiving and the benefits and support your company has, how can you share that with others? You share the knowledge and resources. If your ears perk up because someone's a caregiver that just has someone that's going into a nursing home, for instance, maybe you can help direct that person to some benefits that your company may have or resources, like the Caregiving Alliance. Be an upstander, change the narrative. So if you notice that caregiving is kind of given a negative bias, how can you change that in support of caregiving in the workplace? And then providing direct support or coverage, really just helping others, pulling in resources that can help caregiver as a whole, bringing in an expert into the company to talk about it, maybe for all the employees. And then also, influence future policies and benefits. So if you see things that other companies are doing better, maybe they've got some amazing benefits based on caregiving, or you see gaps, you see opportunities that could really help the caregiver in your workplace. How can you maybe work with others to help bring that to better outcomes for your company?
I think what I would say here is the distribution of resources is uneven. And we know that we're seeing more caregiving attention with larger employers. They're finding more tools and resources that they're providing. They're not quite as available generally with kind of those medium and small employers, but Disability In is doing a great work in providing these toolkits to employers and to caregivers to help even the smallest employers think about how they can better support their caregiving employees. And I think that being an upstander is such an important one because whether you are currently a caregiver yourself, you've been a caregiver in the past, you expect to be a caregiver in the future, finding a way to support and normalize that conversation, invite those caregiving employees into the conversation, and seeing them for the challenges that they are managing is for every one of us, whether we're an employer, a caregiver, or a colleague today, something we can all do. And it really is as simple as a pause in the conversation. And as a manager, I've had a couple of opportunities, and I'm going to open it up here to ideas. I'd like some information, idea sharing here too, but I've had a couple of opportunities where I knew that one of my team members was caring for a parent, and that weekends were very challenging often, but they cared greatly and deeply and had lovely things to share about their parent. And as others were sharing about their parent, I would simply ask, "How's mom doing?" And they would then have an opportunity to share in a way that they may not otherwise feel know how to share that. Because if you hadn't asked, it's not like the person would say, "Well, my mom's doing great," or "We had a rough weekend." But simply asking the question and giving that person an opportunity to engage in a conversation that otherwise they may not know how to engage. Um, and acknowledging that these are really tough, vulnerable conversations for many employees where they are disclosing things that are very personal in some cases, and may, to the very beginning of this presentation, feel like they are putting them in some kind of risk. Um, I actually think one of my favorite conversations was when I inherited a new team and I was talking with a coworker or a new person on the team. And I was the manager of the team. And I asked him if he ever came into the office. He worked remotely full time. And his immediate reaction was, "No." And I stopped and I thought, why such a reaction? And I said, "Well, would it benefit you? Is there anything I can do?" And I opened this conversation, and what he revealed is that he works from home because he cares for his disabled wife. And it gives him the flexibility to work from home. And we immediately had a conversation about, actually, I said, "Well, you've hit the working caregiver lottery, because if there's anybody who understands this, I do. And let's talk about the flexibility you need, the way you want to communicate." And we really did go through those steps of a communication plan and a caregiving plan. And he is a wonderful employee, and he just needs the flexibility to juggle his responsibilities as a caregiver with his responsibilities as an employer. And I don't think I've ever known him to miss a single deadline. So it is important to be thoughtful and mindful, and careful, certainly, with how you have these conversations, but they can be successful. So before we move on, Darren, do you have anything else you'd like to add before we open it up?
Yeah, I mean, on the same lines, I mean, I think of myself, I probably wasn't very open about caregiving, in the midst of it. I had a well-supported network. I didn't need a lot of extra, flexibility in the years that I was caregiving. But I probably missed an opportunity to talk about caregiving in that positive light. I don't need anything, but it's a way to say, "Hey, I'm a caregiver too, and I'm a good, responsible employee." And I think it lends towards flipping that bias of like if others have a negative bias of caregiving is trouble for an employee. They're just going to um, ask for time off or something. I think there's plenty of employees that are in that caregiving role that are super responsible and have benefits because of caregiving, because they can manage their schedules even better. So even if you're not asking for it, it's probably beneficial to say, "I am a caregiver," and and uh, and kind of try to flip that negative bias to positive if it exists in the workplace.
Beneficial to you potentially for your own emotional well-being, with other people knowing what you're doing, but also really
Mhm.
beneficial with normalizing the conversation and being an example or an upstander for other caregivers in your environment.
No.
So before we kind of get to the close of our presentation, would love to open it up invite people to come off of mute to share questions or concerns, experiences, thoughts around positive things you've experienced as a caregiver in the workplace or challenges you've experienced as a caregiver or employer of a caregiver in the workplace. Best practices, challenges, examples, anything that you would like to share. We'll just give it a moment for somebody to come off mute if you would like to. Quiet group this morning. Okay. Well, what I would say is I think, oh, hold on, there's a chat here. Let me see if somebody's come off. Paying for the time you take off from FMLA. Yes, it is. Paid caregiving leave is I'll call it an emerging benefit with large employers. We are seeing paid parental leave, which is expanding to mothers and fathers, and paid caregiving leave. I will share, I am proud to be an HP employee, and I believe HP has been very, one of the gold standard in supporting caregivers. HP does offer a 2-week caregiving leave, 10 business days a year, and that is paid leave, as well as an ERG and other benefits that caregivers can support themselves and the people in their care, doing the types of things that are very forward. I'd like to hope that over time, this kind of flexibility, which admittedly is biased toward knowledge workers and is much harder for hourly workers, much more challenging to have the kind of flexibility. There is definitely a large employer bias, a knowledge worker, white collar, however you want to call it, bias. But I think we all know that our population is aging. The caregiver responsibility, it's sometimes called caregiver burden, is increasing. About 10 years ago, 15 years ago, there were, 7 adults for every 1 person in care, and now it's about 4 to 1, and by 2030 is expected to be about 3 to 1. And this is a demographic reality with we're aging longer and having fewer children, and in many cases doing multi-generational caregiving with, I'll call it a Dagwood sandwich. It's not even one generation of sandwich, but you might have multiple generations of caring for a parent, a grandparent, and children, or a parent, children, and grandchildren. So it is becoming an increasing challenge, and I hope and believe that we will see continued evolution of flexibility and benefits in the workplace, and hopefully legislative support as well for caregivers and working caregivers.
Yeah, I see Cindy had some examples of what she has challenges for. I wonder if others have any for successes of adjustments or plans that they've introduced that have been successful, or maybe maybe didn't work out well. Do you try to take a half a day once a week on a routine schedule that you can dedicate towards caregiving responsibilities or job share or anything like that?
Getting to work from home, that is a great benefit, and one that increased significantly during COVID. I think we proved during COVID that was could be successful and positive. I think we've seen the pendulum swing back a little bit in the last year or two with more return to work initiatives, but certainly there are more remote opportunities today than there were 10 years ago by far.
Adding into that flexibility of the job, right?
For sure. Anyone here? Let's see. Yeah, the legislature thinks otherwise, which is going back to Jason's comments from this morning. It's important for us to be advocates as part of our work as upstanders to do our best to show up when we can, to speak up to our managers, to our employers, to those employer groups, and demonstrate that being a caregiver doesn't have to be a negative for the business and that there are positives to that. And as I mentioned originally, there are positives. And I honestly can say caregivers are some of the most organized, task-oriented, responsible, committed people I know, because we have to be, right? And I think we had someone in the comments say that they ended up leaving their job to go 24/7, 365. I love that, Ashley. I'm glad you're going to suggest a caregiver ERG at Pacific Source, and we'll have a resource here that I'd be more than happy to send to you to help you with that. There's stand up and ask, I think is what I would say, and whether that's standing up and advocating for yourself, standing up and asking for support for caregivers in your workplace, or standing up as a voice in a legislative feedback session or with your legislator, letting them know what you need. And I think one of the most powerful ways to do that, and one that I have certainly used myself, is helping the person who is not currently touched by caregiving through the power of story, helping them understand that they're just one medical event or personal event away from being a caregiver themselves. And that, if you feel safe sharing your story, if you have a story that you can share, you can help that manager, help that legislator, help that other person realize that they too are very likely to be in your shoes at some point, and may need the support themselves. The power of story is very helpful. And as I was mentioning here, Ashley, the Disability in Caregiving Resource Guide will be available for download from their website soon, but as of yesterday was not yet available. So Darren was able to get us an advanced copy. And I am more than happy to email that to you. So if anyone here would like a copy of that resource guide to share with their employer, to use themselves, to get the details of this communication toolkit that we outlined here today, please just send me an email at dara@learnidaho.org. That's Dara with 2 R's. I also do want to mention, for those of you who are caregivers, Learn Idaho. I have the opportunity to be president of that organization. I wear a lot of hats. I work at HP. I have my care companions, and president of Learn Idaho. And we are a nonprofit with a mission to help people navigate the joys and challenges of aging and caregiving. And we provide free resources to all older adults and caregivers. And you can find all of our content at learnidaho.org. And there is a channel in our video library dedicated to caregiving topics, with more than 50 videos there. And there is a channel in the library introducing community resources. Our community resources channel has all Idaho-based community resources and introduction videos to all of them. So I encourage you to use these resources and leverage the information available for you at Learn Idaho. The Disability in Caregiving Resource Guide does include content for both employees and managers. So happy to provide this to anyone who would like it. And I think we'll close our presentation officially. And I'm sure Darren would be happy to stay and chat with anyone who would like to chat casually. But I think we've all seen this quote before. We know it well. But we're going to take a little bit of spin on it. So there are only 4 kinds of people in the world. Those who have been caregivers, thank them. Those who currently are caregivers, support them. Those who will be caregivers, prepare them. And those who will need caregivers, educate them. So with that, we thank you for spending some time with us this morning. To think about caregiving in the workplace and what you can do if you need support and what you can do if you can provide support. And happy to take any questions, any comments, or just hang out and chat.
Just wanted to say thank you to both Dara and Darren for taking time out of their Saturday to present, and thank you for the wonderful job. We really appreciate it.
You're welcome. Thank you.
My pleasure. All right. Wonderful. I will get those emails out to you all this afternoon. Anyone who would like them.